wanted to take just a few minutes this evening to bring about, again, discussions about another community, a community in Alaska, a community that is in crisis. We've heard a lot about communities in crisis, whether it's Flint, Michigan, whether it's those communities that have suffered the flooding in Louisiana. But I have a community in Alaska, little small community, less than 1,000 people, by the name of King Cove. And King Cove remains at risk, not because of flooding, not because of a failed water system, but really because of a decision that was made by our own government, a heartless decision made by the federal government. King Cove's problem is not contamination in its drinking water supply. It's something far more fundamental. And it's something that virtually all of our communities, whether you're in Colorado or California, we take these things for granted. And what the people in King Cove are asking for is a very simple road, a reliable access to medical emergency transportation. They simply want to be able to reach proper care in time in the event of an injury or an illness. So for those who aren't familiar with this small community of King Cove, it's a remote fishing community. It's about 625 air miles southwest of Anchorage. It's near the Alaska Peninsula. 85% of the residents there are Alaska Natives. Many are Aleut and members of the federally recognized Agaduks tribe. And as with so many of the communities in the state of Alaska, in fact, 80% of our communities are not connected by road, but King Cove can only be reached by boat or by airplane. Often that's a challenge. The community is kind of nestled in this spit of land, and it's surrounded on one side by ocean and on the other by high volcanic mountains. And this is an area that isn't known for its weather. Gets really high winds, huge storms, dense fog all the way to the ground. King Cove does have a gravel airstrip that it can access, and the small planes that fly in and out there regularly grapple with low visibility, very, very strong turbulence that comes down off the mountains, forces the planes down. You've got gale force crosswinds. It is not a place for beginner pilots, and I shouldn't even say that because it makes it sound too light. These are very serious flying conditions, but that's how you get in and out. Now, I did mention it's accessible by boat, but if it's stormy in the air, it's also stormy on the water. Local mariners are facing the same conditions, plus you add in 12 to 14-foot seas to contend with. Now, most of the time, you're saying, well, I'm not going to travel when the weather is that foul, but there are times when you have to travel, when a medical emergency occurs that is beyond the capacity or the capability of the local clinic there. Because keep in mind, this is a very small town, this is a very small clinic. You don't have a doctor that can just get in a car and provide services. We don't have a doctor there. We have a physician's assistant. We may have doctors come in occasionally, but you don't have the medical care that you need if you have severe trauma, or if you're a woman in labor, if you have any kind of a serious illness. King Cove Clinic just simply cannot provide the level of service and care that you need. So what do? Well, the first step is to transport those who are sick and injured to the nearby community of Cold Bay. Now, Cold Bay is host to a 10,000-foot long all-weather runway. It's one of the longest runways that we have in the state. It was built after World War II. It's almost always open because they don't get the same weather conditions. And here's the beauty of it. It's only 30 miles from where you are in King Cove. So really the challenge here for people who need to get out quickly is not getting from Cold Bay to Anchorage, the 625 air miles, but from King Cove to Cold Bay, this 30 miles. That's the toughest part of the journey there. And having seen this firsthand, I know that the people who live there in King Cove, the natives who live there, the best answer, really the only answer, is to do what virtually every other community would do, and that's build this short connector road. And so keep in mind, we're talking about a distance here of 30 miles between the two communities. But It's not even 30 miles that I'm talking about. What we are seeking is a short, about 10 to 11 miles, gravel, one lane, non-commercial use road. That's what we're talking about here. That's all that we're needed to connect two existing roads. There's one that runs out of King Cove, and there's another one that runs out of Cold Bay. So we need to link these two communities to finally and fully protect the health and safety of nearly 1,000 Alaskans. So what we need is a 10-mile, one-lane gravel non-commercial use road. You would say, well, so do it. Why haven't you built the road? And the reason is we cannot secure permission from our own federal government because, and here's the catch here, because it would cross a small sliver of the Eisenbeck National Wildlife Refuge that was designated back in the 80s as federal wilderness. Now, they failed to consult with the native people who were in King Cove at the time, but that designation was put in place. So we've been working through this for a period of years, actually a period of decades. And we thought that we had this resolved back in 2009. We overwhelmingly passed a lands bill through this chamber that was signed into law by this president, and it gave the Department of Interior the ability to approve a road for King Cove. And what it was a land exchange. And quite honestly, it was an unbelievable deal. Alaskans offered a roughly 300-to-1 land exchange, a 300-to-1 land exchange in the federal government's favor. So the people of King Cove said, we need 206 acres for a road corridor, and we're willing to exchange, along with the state of Alaska, 61,000 acres of our state lands and of our native lands. And let me repeat that. The lands that were conveyed to the natives upon settlement of their native land claims, they were willing to give up, give back to the federal government so that they could get a small 206-acre corridor. So between the native lands and the state lands, a 300-to-1 land exchange was offered up. Pretty sweet deal. But against all odds, the Secretary of the Interior rejected that offer. She did this on the day before Christmas Eve back in 2013. I think she was hoping that no one was going to pay attention. But she decided against cherry stemming these 206 acres, which, keep in mind, this is about 0.07% of the refuge, because she said that somebody needs to speak up for the birds. Someone needs to speak up and represent the waterfowl. And she decided that protecting the people of King Cove while expanding the Eisenbeck Refuge by tens of thousands of acres was somehow or other just not worth it. And to this day, years later, I still struggle with how she could come to that decision. It was a horrible decision. It was cruel, it was cold-hearted against the Alaska Native people of King Cove who care deeply about these lands and have stewarded them for thousands of years. It was baffling. It's not as if there are no roads out in this area. Since World War II, we have had roads out in this area. The birds have flown, they have used it as their feeding sites. But it's not as if this is this protected, pristine area. The Fish and Wildlife Service brags on its website that local waterfowl hunting is world famous and spectacular. Come on out. You want to be a sportsman? Come out. Go hunt on the refuge here. But you can't have this 10-mile, one-lane gravel non-commercial use road there because somebody has to watch out for the birds. The decision reflects a double standard. When you think about refuges in other parts of the country, we've got roads through our refuges throughout the country. Whether Florida, Maryland, Texas, Louisiana, North Carolina, Arizona, Montana, Missouri, Illinois, New Mexico, Nevada, Washington State. So this would not be the first time that you would have a small, narrow road through a refuge area. But it's also ignorant. It's ignorant of the fact that human lives have been lost in King Cove as medevacs were attempted to be carried out in bad weather. We've had a total of 19 people who have died since 1980, either in plane crashes or because they simply they didn't last before they could be taken out. And the Interior Department's decision was cynical. It was callous. It devastated the people of King Cove who really finally thought help is on the way. But it shattered the trust responsibility that the federal government is supposed to have to our Native people. And it has left these people in the same situation that they've been in for decades now. They're at the mercy of the elements. They have the potential to suffer needless pain, perhaps even death, if they should have a medical emergency. And people have said to me, well, Lisa, there's lots of places in Alaska where it's really tough to get in and out of, that weather shuts you down, that you're not connected by road. And so why is King Cove so different, so special? And it's not that they're so different or so special, but it's that there is an easier answer that is right there. In many of the communities, there is not an easier answer. Again, we're talking about a small connector road that could be the answer here. But it's been nearly 1,000 days since Secretary Jewell decided to just wash her hands of this issue. She promised the local residents that she was going to figure out a way to help them gain reliable transportation to Cold Bay. But instead of working towards a real solution, she has decided to just run the clock out. We have seen no engagement with local residents, no budget requests, no administrative action, just one topical study of alternatives. And this is one of alternatives that have been examined before and rejected before as unworkable. Now, as chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, I held an oversight hearing earlier this year, and as the presiding officer, you had an opportunity to hear from the residents of King Cove, to talk about what they have gone through, the anguish that this has caused their community. We heard about King Cove's decades-long fight for a life-saving road from its mayor and from the spokeswoman of the Agaduks tribe. We heard strong support for the road from Alaska's lieutenant governor, a member of the Democratic Party, an Alaska native. We also heard from a representative of the National Congress of American Indians. We also heard some really unsettling things. We heard about the Valium dispenser at the local medical clinic, where many of the residents who have such anxiety and stress about flying because of the hazards of flying out of this little strip, that they're given 2 pills out of these dispensaries, one for the flight out of King Cove and one for when you return. We also heard from a retired Coast Guard commander who led a mission to locate a plane crash that killed 4 individuals, including a fisherman who was being medevaced out because of an amputated foot. And the commander told us about the horror of finding these bodies still upright, belted into their seats, with limbs that were frozen and could not be untangled. A memory that you just don't ever forget. King Cove has now had a total of 51 more medevacs. 51 more medevacs since Secretary Jewell's decision in December of 2013 when she rejected this road. Our U.S. Coast Guard has carried out 17 of those medevacs, risking their own crews to rescue those in need, and we thank them for that. But that is not the Coast Guard's mission. But they are there when called. But those patients that have been medevaced have been individuals in terrible pain and trauma. We had one man who dislocated both hips when a 600-pound crab pot fell on him. We had elderly residents with internal bleeding or sepsis or apparent heart attacks. We had an infant baby boy that was struggling to breathe. And then just this past month, we think, oh, summertime, August, good weather. This was a bad month for King Cove. No fewer than 4 medevacs have been carried out. One was an elderly woman who arrived at the medical clinic with a hip fracture, and she needed to be medevaced to Anchorage. but had to wait for more than 40 hours because the heavy fog that was on the ground just would not lift. So that's what's happening in King Cove without a life-saving road. And I know, Mr. President, that King Cove, Alaska is a long way from where we are here, and many in this chamber, most in this chamber, will never go there. Most people in America will not ever go there. But as remote as they are, as small as this community is, I would remind my colleagues that this is still an American community. These are Americans. These are people who deserve to have our help, and it's our job to help assist them, and they're not asking for much. So, Mr. President, I will tell you, we should not let this continue. The people of King Cove are suffering, and it is entirely within our power to protect them. And my amendment and what I have offered in legislation and amendments is an opportunity after decades of waiting and delay and frustration and pain to finally authorize a short, one-lane gravel, non-commercial use road. But as I mentioned, I am not going to be raising my amendment to a vote on the word of bill, but I do want the Senate to understand it is well past time to help the good people of King Cove. We need to ensure that they have reliable access to emergency medical transportation, and we need to do it this year so that we can put an end to the dangers, an end to the anxiety, an end to the suffering that this community is enduring, and enduring because of a decision by our own federal government. And with that, Mr. President, I thank you. And